Again, thanks to those of you waiting online. We'll get started now. And thanks to everybody, both online and here, for joining us. This is a very special session of the Martin Center Research Seminar Series. We're currently in our 54th edition of the series, which we're proud to say makes us among the longest running in our field of architecture, design, and urbanism here at the University of Cambridge Department of Architecture. My name is Michael Salka. I am a PhD candidate at the department, as well as one of the conveners of the series, and I will be serving as chair for the evening. I'll start with some introductions before we get into our program. So in brief, we're talking about the Scroope 32 journal, the latest edition of the journal that is promoted by the Department of Architecture here at Cambridge. And Scroope 32 explores the quotidian and the enchanted, the ways in which identity is constructed, projected, and framed, and the pathways by which we navigate a world that is often disorienting and alienating. In this roundtable, we'll talk about how it engages in an interdisciplinary conversation about the politics of the spaces that we inhabit and the creation and reproduction of meaning within the built environment. So that being said, I'll now introduce the two people most directly responsible for curating and collecting the fantastic works in Scroope 32. Those are our editors-in-chief, Fatma Mhmood and Heather Mitcheltree. Fatma Mhmood is also a PhD candidate here at the Department of Architecture at the University of Cambridge. Her research interest lies at the intersection of rapid urbanization, desert landscapes, gender, and postcolonial studies. She holds a Master in Design Studies with a concentration in urbanism, landscape, and ecology from Harvard University, along with a Master in Architecture and Urban Design from Columbia University and a BArch from the American University of Sharjah. She has practiced in New York City and Dubai on multi-scalar design projects, and her PhD research is funded by the UAE Scholarships Office. We're also joined by Heather Mitcheltree, likewise editor-in-chief and also a PhD candidate here at Cambridge. She holds a Bachelor of Arts alongside a Bachelor of Science, a Bachelor of Planning in Design and Architecture, and a Master of Architecture. She is currently employed by the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne, and her work focuses primarily on traumascapes, or interdisciplinary approaches to understanding and representing complex socio-spatial narratives and the psychological impact of the built environment. In addition to her research and teaching, she engages in private creative design and art collaborations and research consultation. Heather's PhD is supported by the Henry and Rachel Active Traveling Scholarship. Next, I'll introduce some of the contributors who generously offered to share their time with us today. First, we're glad to host Adam Walls, who previously worked in architectural practice before completing his PhD in architectural and urban history and theory. Adam's contribution to Scroope 32, entitled An Astral World, Lighting Imperial London, relates to his doctoral thesis, Twilight Spaces, investigating the transformation of London's nocturnal atmospheres during the era of high imperialism. This work is fundamentally interdisciplinary and brings together literary, visual, and material culture with new materialist, decolonial, and intersectional approaches to the built environment. Adam's previous work on gender and atmosphere has also been published in the Architectural Theory Review. He currently teaches at UCL, where he is co-author of an open access curriculum, Race and Space, and an organizing member of the Bartlett's Decolonial Reading Group. There will be two other contributors joining us shortly. They're in transit, but we expect not long from now. Also, Stephen Ajadi, who is an award-winning architect, planner, and development economist. He holds postgraduate degrees in architecture, sustainable design, economics, and management, all with distinctions. Stephen's contribution to Scroope 32, entitled Mapping Magic in Markets of Africa, relates to his varied experience in the African context, which includes leadership of the Bourbon Office in architecture and planning practice in Nigeria and Uganda. He also founded the Penumbra Space Foundation to help displaced people, as well as the Cambridge Initiative for African Urbanism, and has just completed his doctoral study in land economy here also at the University of Cambridge. He is likewise currently a faculty member at the AA School in London, where he teaches African urbanism. Last but not least, Flora Samuel will join us shortly as well. She, besides being professor of architecture and head of the Department of Architecture here at Cambridge, contributed the foreword to Scroope 32. Her research work is currently focused on improving inclusion within the planning system. She is leading the development of the Cambridge Room along these lines, an engagement space for the city, and her most recent book is Housing for Hope and Wellbeing. So that's a very short introduction, a lot of ambitious titles there to go through, but very glad to have you all. I'll then outline the program before handing off to Heather and Fatma. So for the remainder of our time together, We'll proceed with a deeper framing of the Scroope 32 journal, its ambitions and its topics from the editors-in-chief. Then each contributor will be given approximately 15 minutes to discuss their pieces. Lastly, we'll try to leave some time, perhaps 20 or 30 minutes, for a Q&A, both with the in-person and the online audience that I will moderate. And finally, we'll make a pitch for the forthcoming editions before inviting you all to join us for tea, cakes, and a more casual conversation in the room next door. So, with no further ado, Fatma and Heather, would you please introduce the journal for us?
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. Fatma and I are going to do this as a duo here, just like we did with the publication. It was very much a collaboration and labour of love. So it's nice to be invited to talk today and have some of our authors here with us at the round table. So thank you, Adam. And like Michael said, both Stephen and Flora will be joining us shortly. Today's roundtable focuses on Scroope 32 and the quotidian and the enchanted. So it's a project that has been very close to our hearts over the last 12 months. And we're excited to be able to expand on some of the discussions presented within the journal, within the context of the Martin Centre Research Seminars. So thank you again for the invite. Now, in setting up the theme of the quotidian and the enchanted, our call for this issue hoped to build an interdisciplinary conversation on the politics of the spaces that we inhabit, the ways in which identity is constructed, projected, and framed, and the pathways by which we navigate a world that is often disorienting and alienating. We deliberately cast the net wide and rather obscurely. It was an open call for works of any type, and we got a range of works, which was wonderful to see, that explored and challenged the forms, spaces, environments, landscapes, and constructs that we create. An invitation for practitioners to challenge socio-spatial representations of mythscapes and the creation and reproduction of forms of identity, inequality, gender, ideologies, and meaning within the built environment. As we workshopped ideas for the issue, we wanted to set a theme that reflected the zeitgeist of our times and enabled a critical engagement with an image and imaginings of spatial practices, watching conflicts continue to rage and the pressing challenges of climate change and inaction and inaction and inaction. On a global scale, we felt that we needed to provide space for authors to explore the complexity of our times while still opening space for joy, wonder, play, curiosity, and above all, hope. Rather than the quotidian and the enchanted sitting in opposition, through our call, we wanted to create a dialogue for a spectrum of overlapping and interconnecting dialogues that made space for alternating narratives, practices, histories, and linkages to land and place.
Good afternoon, everyone. So now I'll start by talking briefly about the content of the journal. And I would like to start by saying that we're very impressed by the diversity of responses that we received, the range of approaches, and the unique lenses that each author brought to interpret the quotidian and the enchanted. And so the forms of dialogues that emerged make poetry of the everyday, critique socio-spatial relations, and creatively reimagined the world around us. So the authors explored and challenged the forms, spaces, environments, landscapes, and the constructs that we create, as well as the roles they play in revealing mystical aspects within our constructed realities. And so the first three articles critically examine our relationship with the cosmos and the ways in which we attune ourselves to the world around us. So the first article by Adam Walls, who's here with us and who will talk more about his piece. So Adam wrote on the 19th century frameworks by which celestial imagery and metaphors were used to enchant London's new public lighting infrastructure. Encanting 12 Ideal Cities by Alex Brown and Charity Edwards is a quirky annotated visual exposition and a parallel narrative presenting multiple mystical readings of Superstudio's 12 ideal cities. In their work, Brown and Edwards state, in reference to Superstudio's work, the iterations resist a singular position and provide ongoing revelations, a practice of incantation. Ideal cities are undead and read more through a supernatural collapse of representations. You thought you saw the 13th city. Cities don't just disappear though. They don't reappear either. Somewhere deep down, you know that. Agostino Nicol turns the focus to everyday objects in exploring modes of existence, as he states, corresponding to how we apprehend objects, we can apprehend the world around us. Our buildings talk at least as much as the things they're made from. Gerlinde Verhage presents a critical reading of Carlo Molino's photography, revealing a not so innocent enchantment within the artist's studio. As she states, women enter these male spaces as a muse, in the form of a sensuous Venus figure or in a cloud of butterflies. Darlington, in Obscuring the Camera Obscura, explores the mystical aspects of photography as a catalyst in conjuring change and altering reality into one imbued with hope and optimism. In her work, she states, the camera obscura projects the illusion and truth of the everyday enchanted, and viewed through Rosette, the oracle is simultaneously obscured and revealed, colored by the rituals and delusions that give us hope. In a conversation with Gillian Rose, we discussed the impact of technology on agency, the ways in which we understand the urban environment, and how emergent digital technologies and creative practices can create new voices within both the built environment and academia. And then in the next articles by Ekaterina Stefanescu, Leo Xian, and Joshua Guinness, we see a variety of research methods and representation strategies employed in studying domestic spaces, ranging from ethnographic model making, sketches, and analytical drawings to 3D scanning. Kajita uncovers how archived complaint lists and letters are imaginaries about broader societal conditions. And moving on to works that examine filmic and visual practices, François Pens, through an analysis of the work of Godard, explores the use of film as a medium in crafting visual narratives of our cities and urban environments. Robert Petrusco writes about his ongoing audiovisual explorations that document ecological temporality. In his piece, Petrusco asks, how might an ecological temporality make itself legible to us while pushing against the boundaries of our human finitude? And our final guest who will join us today, Stephen Ajadi, examines the socio-spatial phenomenology of the African market. And lastly, we end the issue with reflections on landscape and the human condition with a poem by Marianne de Dardel.
Okay. So we are now going to hand over to Adam. And Adam, you are free to stand or sit as you feel most comfortable. And we might flick back to your image here. There we go.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me here today and accepting my proposal for John. I think in the spirit of like Flora's really lovely forward, I feel like the universe aligned a bit here. So I was just finishing up, I received your call just as I was finishing my PhD, and into the politics of lighting infrastructure in Imperial London. And I was looking to pull out one of the key themes into an article around this idea of enchantment, and obviously the astral imagery I'll get onto a bit later. And your call was just perfect. I mean, I think there are a few things as mundane or quotidian as a lamppost, but actually in the 19th century was so new and novel and often kind of portrayed as sublime, and often kind of enchanted through these kind of astral metaphors, comparing it to suns, like bright, sublime light of sunlight, stars, moons, these kinds of things. But also it felt fitting because I actually first started this research into lighting in the night about 10 years ago while studying here with Mary Anstine, who's luckily joined us here today. So it felt like a fitting kind of first thing to do with my PhD. So I'll start talking about like what enchantment means for me in this article. In the PhD, I mainly drew it from the work of Jane Bennett and her work, The Enchantment of Everyday Life. And it's kind of undoing what she calls the disenchantment tales of like Max Weber that run throughout many histories of modernity, often through histories of technology. This, particularly with lighting, it's this idea that lighting disenchanted the night. It kind of threw brightness into the dark shadows, kind of drove the demons and devils and ghosts out of the city, all this kind of thing. It rationalized the city. But actually, when you go back to the source materials, it's anything but new forms of enchantment kind of come with the electric light. I guess even today in like popular culture, quite often, whenever there are ghosts, it's often like signified through the flickering of an electric light, right? Whatever, the new always gets merged with the old and the irrational in some way. But in terms of like Jane Bennett's work, it's this idea, it's the central idea of material agency or non-human agency, which is so central to scholarship these days, kind of addressing climate crisis and general things of new materialism. And also, I think in your kind of introduction, you talk about this need to cultivate joy and wonder in the face of all the doom and gloom. That kind of really resonated with me, and obviously it's central to Jane Bennett's argument. But something I came quite late to in my thesis, I kind of got quite involved. I was obviously writing it during the pandemic and Black Lives Matter, and race became so important. We started, it was the publication of Race and Modern Architecture around then, lots of kind of key milestones in our field just starting to come through. And my work, I started off looking generally at gender and class, and increasingly, I think, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit today. Increasingly, as I went back to the source materials, looking at Imperial London, colonialism and race were the central ways that lighting was understood at the time. This has kind of led me to the second theorist that I have engaged with for this idea of enchantment, the work of Sylvia Wynter, who is just kind of blowing my mind. I've only really, I didn't have time to fully process her during my PhD. I came to her quite late, but I used this article as an opportunity to really engage with her work. And one of her arguments is that like the modern world is enchantedly constituted through myths of racial difference. What she calls like the magical thinking of race. It's a theory that's gained kind of concrete lived reality, but is based on nothing but kind of taxonomic systems. And this is one of the things I'm kind of showing through the article. Shall I give a kind of brief summary of the article? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would be good.
Yeah.
For those who haven't
Yeah.
yet.
So my thesis is really like focused on like a 20-year period at the end of the 19th century, so the 1880s and 1890s, when electricity was first introduced. But this thesis kind of starts to put it in along the time frames. We look at the whole 19th century, right from the beginning of gaslight up until the first electric lights, and kind of looking at this idea of the astral imagery, the way like it's ubiquitous throughout the century. It shifts, but it's always there. And just generally, that lighting histories have missed out. They've not really talked about imperialism, like where they have, they talk about it elsewhere, like outside of the metropole, around about kind of lighthouses along the coastlines of empire. Even the use of like arc lights in imperial warfare, like the navy would shine bright lights to kind of blind opponents, like these kind of things. So, but never looking at how imperialism impacted on the metropole and the culture in Britain and London. And one of the kind of key things is that like gaslighting right from the beginning, and I mean gaslighting and electric lighting were invented around the same time. So during the Age of Revolutions, during the Napoleonic Wars specifically. But we switched to, well, so gaslight had already been in use in places like China for centuries, but it was kind of found separately in Britain in the early 19th century, late 18th century. And we deliberately switched to economies of like a gaslight because of Napoleonic trade blockades that stopped us getting access to whale oil and spermaceti, which is like the waxy substance from whales' heads, which meant we had to kind of search for alternative sources of fuel for lighting, which is part of what led us to use the coal and use coal gas. And some of the first places that installed coal gas were cotton mills, so kind of deeply entrenched in imperial economy and the kind of slave economy as well, plantation economy. Yeah, I think I'm pleased with basically from the very beginning, these gas lights were described as like white, and they were described their light as white, and B is kind of as bright as the sun. By the time you get to the mid-century, they're kind of ochre and infernal. They take on the qualities of hell and fire in comparison to the new electric lights, which were whiter and brighter. But as the kind of, like as the technology progresses, this kind of opposition between bright white light and kind of fiery, earthy light kind of continues. I guess basically this, like the central argument is that lighting was used to kind of brighten the metropolitan centre, London, as a way of kind of refiguring it as a kind of almost like heaven on earth, an enchanted heaven on earth, or this kind of peak, bright, luminous peak of civilization. The British Empire was also often called like the Empire of Light, and it kind of very clearly symbolised this as a way of justifying the civilization of God. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Yeah, I don't think there's more to say, but yeah.
That's fantastic, Adam. Thank you. Already gave your introduction to those who aren't familiar at the beginning of our session. If you've had a chance to catch your breath at this point, would you care to give us a few words about the foreword you contributed to the journal and maybe how you see the connections between the rather interdisciplinary pieces in this journal?
Well, yes. When I heard about the journal, I got very overexcited because I think it's a very zeitgeist moment sort of a topic that's emerging and bubbling up in architecture schools and other places. I think just in the collective unconscious around, the re-enchantment of our world, really, and what comes with that. So for me, I live in Wales, and I feel very very powerful context in Wales around legend and the language, Welsh language, and colonisation by England, and language as a form of resistance. And it's very alive now with very different policy context, Wales. So I was really excited to hear about the topic. And when I was a student back in the day, we started Scroope, so that was also really, really exciting. It's still going on. It's an amazing tribute to the to everybody over the years who've done it, who've worked on Scroope. So so the topic was super interesting to me, and I was primed, I have to say, to talk today about the research project we're doing this zone, that zone. So I hope it's okay to segue a little bit towards that, because I'd love to talk about that, but also to talk about the papers. So we're doing a research project based, it's called the Public Map Platform, and it's a very large research project based in the Future Observatory in the Design Museum. And it's a design research project. And it's basic, and it's focusing on the Isle of Anglesey in North Wales. Now, there was a radio program in which the Isle of Anglesey floated away and disappeared. It's one of those places that falls off the map. So I think it's a growing research agenda around rurality, rural areas and places that have been very much left off the map. And so what we're going to do in Anglesey is working with community there is to make a very comprehensive map of the island, map with lots and lots of little layers in it. And Data Map Wales has 2,000 layers of data on the island. The layers we're interested in making community layers. And one of those layers is the cultural layer. And I don't know if you feel, well, there's a sort of, again, I think there's a moment that we're having here now, which is that looking at the world economic, socially, environmentally is not enough. Culture has to be at the heart of everything. And I think the SDGs and conversations around indicators are from the culture, and arts and humanities are really, I think, sort of coming up the agenda. So on our project, in the cultural layer, we have hired a troupe of bards. Now, bards are a part of Welsh culture. If you go to school in Wales on St David's Day, you do a poem and somebody gets the bard chair, and it's like Steadford, it's very much part of the culture. A very strong verbal oral tradition that there is in Wales around the language, because Welsh was a very powerful, people used to sail to Rome, and it's sort of a roman de la rose, it's sort of the very kind of courtly love sort of language. And in the cultural, we've got these bards, and they're going to be going around working, making poetry, making song, singing and painting and doing stuff with communities, and these are going to become part of that data layers, which the computer science bunch here are going to try and turn into quantitative data. That's going to be interesting. But I believe that in engaging with communities, you have to, it's not enough to say, put a pin on a map or write something. You've got to actually have a very sort of heartfelt conversation with people around, and it's around their identity and around their language and around the place names between Wales. You know, they're all, the Welsh place names are so redolent with magic actually, and the countryside is so full of these, you know, it's fully in people's oral traditions. I remember being told about the fairies, you know, back in the day. Alive, don't go down there, or in Ireland as well, these sort of alive magic moments. So we're hoping to capture some of that through working with the bards. And I think and hope this is heading towards a situation with other kinds of knowledges are acknowledged in the story of what's going on. And I suppose that's what I did in the forward to the Scroope piece, and tried, I mean, it was difficult. They're very diverse submissions, which is one of the wonderful things about. But what I wanted to allude to is how architectural knowledge has excluded certain kind of knowledges and I think it's definitely got gender dimensions and political dimensions as well. But for me, choosing the subject of enchantment and the quotidian was opening the door to a different kind of way of talking about architecture and a different way of relating to each other. So I thought it was very exciting. So I'm sorry I didn't answer your question.
That's great. You gave us a lot of great content.
But I wanted to tell you about the project. Internships open right now.
I'd like to ask a question for both of you, since we still have maybe some time to go before Stephen arrives. I think acknowledging the diversity among the pieces, something that at least your forward acknowledges and that your piece represents is that perhaps there's more overlap between the technical and the enchanted or the experiential or phenomenological than we often acknowledge, whether that's the case of the technology of lighting that has all of these experiential aspects, or perhaps the integration of technologies like GIS mapping and AI to record and capture some cultural information. I think these overlaps are interesting because in a time like we have now, where you could argue that there are some very definitive and time-pressured challenges to solve, like climate change, which we could, in a very reductive lens, say comes down to carbon, besides population growth and so forth. So I'd like if you could give us some thoughts on how, in fact, cultural or qualitative knowledge supports these technical challenges, or maybe that this distinction or the conflict between spending time to acknowledge cultural values and phenomenological values is not, in fact, in conflict to solving the technical challenges like climate change and population growth.
Please.
Good question. I think it's part of that kind of shift that I was speaking about earlier, like it's happening now, and I guess it makes me think of the work of Bruno Latour. Also, this idea of like situated knowledge, right? Like I think we are now recognizing that all knowledge comes from somewhere. It has a subjectivity to it. Even the most scientific, most objective facts are constructed. They're constructed with certain apparatuses, certain like ways of seeing the world that condition what they're viewing and creating. I think, like Bruno would argue that the culture and nature aren't so technical, cultural, scientific, and these two things aren't separate at all, and never happen. And we're in the process of trying to knit them back together. But
yeah, I mean, it makes me think of, well, the talk about situated knowledge, it makes me think I once sat in a room with scientists in Imperial College, and they all said that they wrote their scientific writings in the first person, acknowledging the subjectivity of science or based knowledge. And I wrote about this in my book, Why Architects Matter, that I think that actually there's a lot more science and method in art than people give credit for. Then there's a lot more subjectivity in science than people give credit for, and that they shouldn't be, we should perhaps getting away from these dualities of things. And I think what I feel is going on at the moment is there's much more humility about how little we do know about the world, and yeah, much greater acknowledgement of the mystery of why we're here. And I'm quite interested in Zen Buddhism and things, so there's definitely a bit of that going on in all of this. And I think at the same time, there is this weird thing where actually very intangible things can be captured and explored and sort of not explicated, but it can be captured, and patterns through deep data and all these sort of things can be identified. So I don't know, I just feel it's becoming less dualistic. And let's face it, dualism is never a very good way to operate in this world.
But I love the idea of maybe the pendulum of collective focus swinging towards technology for some time has advanced that to the point at which we can perhaps apply it more productively to some cultural knowledge or start to reintegrate.
Yes, I think so. Well, we're in a school of arts and humanities here, and numbers of people doing arts and humanities is plummeting. And the school is thinking about, how do we re-energize the arts and humanities? And I think that there is such a powerful role for the arts and humanities actually in mediating between these technologies and changes. So it's a real opportunity.
Indeed. So we're about 20 minutes past the hour now. Fatma and Heather, I'd like to invite you guys to ask a couple more of your discussion questions while we wait for Stephen, and if he arrives in time, we'll give him the floor. Otherwise, we can open it up to the audience at large.
Sure. Okay.
So I'd like to briefly quote from your introduction that you read in school. I'd argue that as a form of resistance to the homogenizing influence of our neoliberal times, the starting point of any architectural project should be the myths and legends of its place hidden in the names of places and the folds of land. And so the question that we have, how do you see architecture as an act of care and respect for the land, as offering new ways of thinking about practice?
So sorry, I didn't hear you very well, but focusing on the land. Yes, so I think that there is, the land is sacred, you know, in any, should not be owned. And I think that architecture and architects should be resisting the systems around land ownership and disrespect of the land. I try to do this in my work by drawing attention to injustice. But there's also other ways of, you know, the Glenn Murcutt thing of sitting lightly on the land somehow, that people can adhere to. So, I mean, yeah, because I'm coming at this from a position of, like I feel very imbued in my Celtic kind of where I come from. Well, I'm a huge hodgepodge of different cultures. I think most people are. But, so I'm sort of coming at this from a belief in the mythopoetic world. In fact, sitting here reminds me again when I was a student and Peter Carl would be doing lectures, and I was so jealous of those societies that believed that a stone was alive, you know, and that, oh God, wouldn't the world be magic, you know, if you believe that things were alive. But as I've gone through life, I do believe the stone is alive, and I do believe a tree is a conscious thing, not a thing. And I think, but I'm not a very theoretical kind of person, but I just think architects can be respectful in that way. And I think indeed the communities are wanting and desiring that respect, because I think a lot of architectural practice is incredibly disrespectful. We had a fascinating event yesterday with Unfold, with Kieran Doherty talking about the Upland film, and you know, there you see the tortures of the land done in mining, and then you see how those minerals went into these dreadful iconic towers, you know, and just, oh my God. So everything's in small steps, and I think positive change is happening, but it's so slow that you barely can see it. I just think build respect into the way that you work and the kind of person you want to be in your values. So I can't offer anything more concrete than that, but my obsession is to try and make this sort of culture of care. And people like Kim Trobel have done PhDs on care. There's a whole sort of care research. It's not like care in the community or care it's but about being caring. I think that we have a duty to work in that way, otherwise, and I think that is also, you know, I get a lot of third years coming to me now agonizing about their career paths, you know. Who do you want to be as a human being, and where do you want to go? So yeah, I come at this more from my lived experience and my sort of own journey than I do from academic knowledge, and I've got plenty of academic knowledge. But as I get older, I want to operate from the heart, and I can't explain it. But that's where I'm coming from. Okay.
Thank you for trying to explain.
Try.
Fatma, do you have other discussion points?
We do, but we think we might open up to audience questions, and then we can seed other questions back in.
Great, yeah, so we have the audience that's clearly here, and then we also have our secret audience that is joining us through Zoom. My co-conveners, Hamideh and Jerry, will manage any questions that come through the Zoom call. So you can hear me now in the virtual sphere. Go ahead and either type your questions in the Q&A feature or raise your hand if you'd like to vocalize, and Hamideh will give you permission to speak. In the meantime, do we have any questions from you all here?